All right, so let's talk about our journey today. We're going to start with some of the challenges, both for sales managers in general, and especially today in this evolving world that we're in, and tie that to a little bit around what success looks like for the sales manager. So what are we asking them to do? What are some of the challenges, and how do we respond to that? And then some specific suggestions around supporting sales managers as they go about their business, trying to motivate, manage, and coach their teams in this hybrid environment, and then ultimately supporting them through sales enablement, through training. What can we do to enable them to be more successful? Brahm, I don't know if you have any initial thoughts about the agenda. I know we have a lot to go over and to collaborate on here, but anxious to get your thoughts on this subject.
I'll just say it is a challenging role. Being a sales leader, sales manager, especially in this remote environment for the last year and a half, it's definitely stretched and pulled me in some ways that I previously not been stretched and pulled. So I think as we go through each of this, there's some really great lessons and takeaways and stories that I'll be able to share as we go through this.
Absolutely. Well, let's go there. And to start with, we'd love to get your feedback from the audience here. And what I'm going to do is launch a poll. And what we'd like to know, just to get a pulse on the organization or on our participants' organizations here, is what are you planning to do for the rest of the year? Are we looking to be fully remote, as we're hearing, some companies have decided just through the end of the year it's going to be remote? Is it hybrid? And in our case, we're doing a couple days in the office and allowing the flexibility. Some are coming back, and there's some businesses that really demand that. Or, are we still figuring it out, or to be determined? Brahm, I'd love to get your thoughts before I share the responses as they're coming in here. Kind of, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I'm in an interesting situation where I have half of my team local here in Seattle, and the other half is scattered across the US. And so I've had remote employees for the last couple of years. They're going to continue to be remote. For the people that are here around the office, we're going to be going to kind of a flex role where we're going to have suggested days of, if you want to come into the office, you can come into the office on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And so, we're going to have a hybrid/flex approach for this role.
Boy, and I think that really echoes what we're seeing from the audience here. I'll go ahead and share the results, but close to 80% of our group today is saying exactly what you did and what we're experiencing, which is it's going to be somewhat of a hybrid environment, at least for the near term. So close to 20% is saying it's going to be all remote. Very small percentage, less than 5% are going full in the office. But I think that really sets us up for this discussion, which is we need to figure out how to do this well and how to manage in this hybrid environment. And for sales, in some cases it already was hybrid. We have people on the road, you have a distributed team, but now we have some additional challenges that go along with that. I don't know, any surprises there, Brahm, in the poll?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is I think that we're trying to take it from a learn it all approach, meaning that we didn't want to have a really firm, we're going to do this and not learn as we go forward here. And so I think that it's great to see that there's a lot of hybrid out there, that we're probably all going to be going back to the office in different ways here. I think something that sticks out to me as I think about our team here, I don't know if everybody remembers what it's actually like to work back in an office. So I think that there's going to be a big transition period of some of the benefits or drawbacks, or getting comfortable with new environments again.
It's funny you mentioned that, and I'll just share, when we were getting back together and we started after the 4th of July, coming back a few days a week, we had to learn how to work in a office environment again. Even things as simple as, okay, if we're around the table but we're all viewing the same presentation, how are we going to do that? And do the monitors work? And do we remember what that looks like? Or if we have some that are remote but some in the conference room, and does all the technology work, and are we able to share with colleagues that aren't there? So yeah, I think we are figuring it out.
Yeah, and what about lunch, the most important part? Trying to figure out the food situation.
Yeah, cramming everybody into a small conference room and eating from the same pizza kind of has a different connotation these days, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah, so let's get some feedback from the group today as well. in the chat, if you would, and again, just do the click down to all participants. What are some of the challenges you see with managing a remote team? So we've said, boy, 80% of our audience is in this challenge. So what are some of the unique things that you've seen over the last 18 months that are emerging? And if you wouldn't mind, just chat in as a group here. What are some of the things that you all are running into? Brahm, love to get your thoughts on, what jumps out to you.
Yeah. I see Lisa shared distractions at home. Could not agree more, both for me personally, but also for my people. And let's see, supporting remote employees who are struggling. Douglas, I could not agree more. I think that that's something that I think we'll actually touch on this topic later when it comes to empathy, but I've had a few employees that have gone through some really difficult times the last year, and trying to connect with them, trying to support them, figure out how to be there for them and connect with them when you don't have that opportunity to be face to face, I think is a really big challenge. And Marianne cannot agree more. Keeping sales folks motivated. We'll definitely talk about that.
Absolutely. Abdul's point about the personal interaction, and I think that's one of the things that people are seeing with bringing people back. It's like, well, we don't have to have everybody here, but it's nice to collaborate. It's nice to see people and be able to have a meeting, face to face or a one-on-one. So I think that's definitely something that people value, and we're trying to figure out how to support that and make that meaningful.
And Lori here, brought up another great point, which is for any of you that have assumed a new managerial position in the last year and a half without the opportunity to actually meet your people face to face, it can be really hard to get to know them. And I think that was something I inherited a couple of new AEs in the last year and a half. I've onboarded a couple new ones, and trying to build trust relationships, and it's a really big challenge. I think, and I can share a few stories as we go through this, but this is good.
Yeah, no, it's a great group today. I really appreciate everybody's involvement, because that idea of building, and we'll have some tips and tricks at the end about engaging. And we believe as leaders, we should be treating whether it's salespeople or your employees as customers, right? So when you're servicing them or trying to connect, we should be doing all those things we're trying to do to connect with our customers virtually, and having video and making sure we're making it interactive. And I think that came up from a few people talking about, well, how are our customers engaging and connecting with them in a unique way? So I think we really need to be thinking through how this change has happened, across both our employees and our customers. Absolutely. Wow, great thoughts from the group here. So, and yes, you should be able to see the chat if you click on that on your ribbon, or you may need to click on the 3 buttons, depending on if your screen's minimized, where it says more. That'll bring up the chat, and then you can see the responses as we go along. We'll be using that throughout. But it's interesting, Brahm, as we were discussing and prepping for this, we hit on a number of challenges that happen to frontline managers in general, and then specifically today. And I think we heard a lot of these themes in the chat, which is, and one that comes up, and I think you mentioned it, is, boy, we're just slammed, right? We're able to schedule these back-to-back Zoom meetings, maybe more even than we would have had in person. There isn't time to do the deep work ourselves, and we're still struggling to think about, and I hear this from sales leaders all the time, like, I don't know what my team's doing. It's not that I don't trust them, but they're not there. I'm not really sure. We're trying to manage and monitor, their activities, but boy, we're not really sure, and that's really uncomfortable for some people. I don't know what else resonates here in terms of those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, the back-to-back meetings, it probably ties into a few other ones, but I look at my calendar these days, and trying to slot things in throughout the day that I need to quickly get done is just so hard. And I really miss that opportunity to just turn around and be like, hey, quick question, what's the deal with blah, blah, blah? And the quick little, maybe 1-2 minute conversations completely turn into, you need to schedule 30 minutes with somebody to have a dialogue. And so I think that I also have found that it's hard for me to have more personal conversations with people when the one-on-ones feel very much like we're just going to go down our checklist of open items that we've been scratching down on a piece of paper or taking notes on throughout the week that we have to cover and address. So I think creating some space to have more personal conversations with people is something else that I've really tried to make an effort to do.
Oh, no, I
Yeah.
love that. I think we do need to be more intentional. And you're right, it's not just a status meeting, but it really is a one-on-one. I know with my sales team, and I have really enjoyed this actually, is even when we were still locked down, but we felt comfortable enough getting together and going for a walk. And in that case, that may be the only time we see each other in person, but we're going for a walk, we're outside, but we have a chance to catch up and almost like you said, throw away the checklist, but let's just figure, how are you doing, what's going on. Let's have that connection personally. And I think those can create a little bit more opportunity to do that. And then as you mentioned, we may need to build space into our calendars to have more deep work, right? So let's block out that time. Otherwise, it's going to get hit. And especially now with third-party apps that allow your customers to schedule on your calendar, really convenient, but it also means you can get booked up, nonstop all day.
Yeah, and not to get into tactics and ideas already, but one of the things that has worked really well for us is we made a mandate across everybody: Thursday afternoons from 2 to 5, no internal meetings. And so it's not just me blocking off my calendar, but we all make a commitment to each other that we're not going to block over that time. So we have focused time to go work on whatever we need to. That's just one idea.
Well, I love that. And yeah, having that time set aside, and even those standing meetings, we always say sometimes you need a stop doing list, just like you need a to-do list. And some of those meetings, like how many meetings are on there recurring that could be an email or that we don't really have to do the same. So I think that really gets to, hey, we're too busy, we're challenged, and we're trying to get work done through others. So we should be focusing on building our team and really helping them be successful, as opposed to what sometimes is just busy work.
And I think the last thing that I'll touch on is just don't know what my team is doing. I think that will be something we should come back to later, because I think there's a certain amount of trust, and then there's also a certain amount of how do you coach somebody when you can't be there to see all of the little interactions you'd normally be able to give feedback on.
Absolutely. No, I think this will set us up for a great discussion. So let's talk a little bit about baseline of what success looks like for the sales manager and where we can go. Some of our participants today may be familiar with our research we did with Selling Power. This is a few years back, but we looked at over 400 different sales leaders and organizations across a number of different industries. And we really tried to understand what the high performing teams were doing differently. And so predominantly this is sales leaders. There were also sales enablement, operations, L&D involved. And so we asked a number of questions around how they were managing. And the first was really, how was the team doing relative to quota? So we tried to segment those organizations that were achieving 75% or more of their targets as high performing. So at least they were hitting their goals, they were doing well. And that was about 20% of the organizations we surveyed. So we tried to say, okay, of those high impact or high performing teams, what can we grasp or look at from a sales management perspective? And not surprising, they were focused more on building their sales managers and focusing on key skills like coaching. So we found that they did more coaching, they were training their managers to coach better, and they were out doing at least 20% of their time, so one day a week on average or more, out coaching or reviewing, and now it may be hybrid or virtual coaching, but at least we were helping to build our team. We're good at setting expectations, managing their performance. Interestingly enough, they were also doing behavior-based interviewing, most of the high impact organizations, so they did a better job of really understanding what the profile of a good rep looks like and then how they were going to interview. They were doing things to build the trust and respect, which comes to sales leadership and how they're showing up and their leadership styles. And then ultimately they were making an investment in training those managers. So I just wanted to share that as a backdrop because I think that's never more true than it is today in terms of these things still resonate. Now, how do we apply and adapt those, right, in the hybrid world? I know you've been through some of our programs, Brahm. I'm curious, any of these really jump out for you in terms of what you've taken away or applied in your situation?
Yeah, I think you actually have a couple of slides that as we were preparing for this conversation, I was like, oh, yep, that's where all of my best practices came from. I think coaching for me is just, it's number one. And I think that as I think about my role as a leader, there was a stat that, what was it? Yeah, 94% of employees would stay longer at their company if they were invested in their career development. And I think that that is my number one role in terms of it. There's so many benefits to coaching when it comes to motivating individuals, helping them to achieve their goals, and just helping me to achieve my own goals by making them better at their work. So I think that that's top of mind for me when I think about how I work with my team. And all of these other ones are really important. And I think that I also think about how my company can invest in me and the other sales leaders in terms of a training investment. So I think investing in managers is just as important as managers investing in their people.
That's great. And as we know, the managers unfortunately almost often get forgotten, right? We spend the time on the sales training, the sales methodology, we invest in that, but the managers, we promote those top performing reps, put them into that role and think, okay, well, they'll figure it out. And it is a different skill set, and we know that there's a lot to that. So yeah, it's interesting. And that stat around coaching, I think, is really important today, because we know there's a lot of movement in the market.
Yep.
People are looking at lifestyle changes. They're some industries are doing quite well and they're hiring, and so people are shifting around. And as you mentioned, they will often quit their manager or their situation, versus the competition or the company or some other things. So the better job we can do connecting and coaching, I think the better off we'll be. So no, I think that sets us up for this discussion, which is, what are those things the sales manager is really focused on? And if we look at, we want to manage performance, obviously, and accelerate their sales performance, and we'll touch on that. The manager's getting beaten up over the forecasts, and we want those to be accurate. That goes to pipeline management and hygiene and all those factors. We need to get the right people on board and onboard them and ramp them up. Improving those selling skills so that they can perform at a top level. We already touched on, somebody brought up motivation. How do we keep them engaged and motivated, especially in a hybrid world? And then all of this comes together around, well, what is our vision as a manager for our sales team? Where are we trying to go? Again, I know you see this out in the field and with your managers as well. Which are some of these that they struggle with, or that are especially important to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's accelerating sales performance, execution of the sales vision, and improving selling skills. Those are the three top of mind ones for me and my team right now. We have aggressive goals that continue to go up year over year. And when it comes down to how we're going to get and achieve those goals, we have to be the first team to say, here is the vision of how we are going to go execute on your goals for this year. And once we've laid down that groundwork of here's our vision, then we're going to have to support our team members in coaching moments to improve their selling skills. And so, I think that a lot of these tie together and are all really important topics here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll touch on a few of these in more detail, one specifically around coaching, because there was a question, I think Marianne asked about a coaching checklist or what they should incorporate. And we'll talk about the coaching mindset and then coaching on specific skills. But Brahm, I'll put you on the spot here. What do you like to see or do in that coaching to make sure it's kind of aligned or you're on task?
Yeah, I think what I always try to do with coaching is understand, I guess it depends on what I'm trying to coach around. The first thing that I like to do is just assess the person that I'm giving coaching. let's just say there's a situation where they made a decision to exit, or they navigated a deal in one way, and I want to give them some coaching around a different way to do it. So first, I try to really dig in and understand, was this a deliberate decision that they decided to take an action and do something one specific way? So I'm doing my own discovery on my people. Why did you do it that way? Help me understand. Like, I'm really just trying to be inquisitive. So I'm not trying to make any assumptions about why they took any actions. And once I've really understood their mindset, then I try to reframe and ask them, okay, if you could do it again, what would you do differently? And then give them a chance to reflect. And then I give them my perspective. So I have to really hold back on sharing anything with the individual I'm working with until I've had given them the learning moment to first explain, here is why I did whatever I did that way. And if I did it differently, nope, I think I did it perfectly. Or maybe it's, if I had to do it again, I think I'd do it this way. And then we can have a conversation about that. But I think that giving your people the opportunity to learn on their own, and less being the person that tells them what to do, but more about the guide, I think is a really great way to coach. So I don't know if that help. It's a very, without a specific scenario or situation in mind, that's kind of how I think about it in a more general context.
No, I think it's a great context, because I think we do start at the macro, and we'll talk about the coaching mindset, right? Just even asking questions and getting that, hey, how did you think it went? What might you do differently, can be super enlightening. And then in our coaching program, I mean, we have a skills assessment, right? To say, well, let's actually look across this, and I want the rep to do it for themselves as well. And let's have a conversation. And so, boy, that's really enlightening to sit down and go through that and say, oh, we agree on these areas, and there's a disconnect. There's a difference in how we see these skills. So either we need to reset expectations or clarify what good looks like, or maybe I need to go out and observe that more because I have a different perspective. So I think there's a lot we can learn from that. And yeah, great insights.
Absolutely. And really quickly before we continue, Sanjay brought up a good point, which is he's having a hard time getting his management team to invest in training. And I think that before we even get into some of the strategies here, you need to sell your managers on why coaching and training their people is important. And I think that if it comes to your managers not saying that it's a worthwhile investment of their own time into coaching and developing their people, then you got to start there. And I think that they need to see the value in helping their team to become better at what they do, as a way for me, once I've got my team in a place that they can go execute on the basics, it allows me to be more strategic with my time as a leader. So I think starting with, maybe you have to sell them on why investing in training is so important in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit challenging. And I love that we're kind of diving into this topic, because with coaching, it's not as easy as saying, oh, if we reduce our discounting, we're going to make higher margins, right? It's a direct skill correlation. With coaching, it takes a little bit more to pull through, but there is a very strong business case. And there's a lot of research that supports that. And that's where I'd start as well, which is you may need to share the business case for coaching, which there's a lot of research around. The more coaching and better coaching that happens, the higher performing sales team it ends up producing, and we can reduce turnover, right? So to your stat, the better coaching we're doing, less likely to leave the organization. What is the cost of a new hire? There's a business case around that as well. We know that better engagement leads to better customer satisfaction. So there's just all sorts of ripple effects, hard to isolate sometimes, but starting with that fact that better coaching equals better sales results, we need to invest in our managers.
100%.
So I'd love to, again, open up a poll here and just get the thoughts from the group, which is, when we're thinking about the priorities for your sales managers, what's on the top of the list from our group here? And if you wouldn't mind, just click on, what jumps. And I know this is like tough to, I can't pick just one, right? But what do you think would really help the sales organizations the most? Is it better forecasting, better hiring decisions, improving the selling skills and the coaching that goes along with that, maybe the motivation and retention, or supporting a sales vision? My guess is we'll get a bigger cross section on this one. What are you seeing from some of your managers in terms of priorities for them to focus on?
Oh, wait, sorry. Was that for me?
Yeah, sorry.
Or for the poll here?
Yep. And I'll just keep this open for a few minutes and then respond. But
Perfect.
do any of these jump out, in terms of priorities for your managers?
Yeah. I mean, I think C and C, D, and E are all really top of mind right now. I think we have a lot of new folks that we're bringing on board and promoting either from within or bringing in from the outside. And so there's a lot of onboarding and coaching and development that needs to happen to help somebody shorten the amount of time it takes before they're productive. And so it really requires a lot of hands-on coaching and skill development. I think prioritizing new employee onboarding is something that's really important. Again, with retention of team, I think that kind of ties to the coaching and, consistent sales vision. Again, if you can't explain to your team what you want them to do and then hold them accountable to doing that, then that's just where you got to start. And so I think that that's a really important thing. And that's something at Highspot that we're investing heavily into in these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, your platform does a great job supporting that, right? So being able to have the playbooks, the resources, the training materials available. And, I think that's, if I'm looking at the poll results here and just shared them, that, it's kind of split, but 60% at least says it's improving selling skills and improving motivation or increasing motivation. We're going to talk to those next, but those are really, if we can get that right, I think we'll also support some of the others. And so, these are the focus areas from the group, and I think consistent with what we're seeing across our clients as well. So let's look at what that may mean, and we've really tailored. This is interesting. Now, we talked about motivating, managing performance, and coaching. So how can we support the managers doing that? And that's consistent with what the group is kind of telling us today. So, we put together this simple model, thinking about things that may be different today in a hybrid environment and what's important. And I'll give a little backstory on this. So there's a book that came out about 5 years ago by Angela Duckworth called Grit, the power of passion and perseverance. I know a number of people may be familiar with that. And she had some really great insights, not just that grit's important as a predictor of success in sales and education and the military. I mean, a lot of different areas, right? The fact that you can persevere over the long haul. It's not just working hard, but working hard and being passionate about what you're doing. How can we create an environment? So her book really came out of her initial TED Talk and the research and said, well, then how do we build a team that we can foster that grit? And I thought what was really interesting is it starts with understanding our team, but having a vision. And we know that people will work harder and lean in more if they know why. So where are we going? Why are we working so hard? Where are we trying to get to? And so I think that's why at the top here is communicating your vision in a way that people understand and can get behind. And it's not just, hey, we need to make 50 calls a day and we need to book X number of meetings, but we're doing that so we can expand our footprint, so we can grow market share, so we can be the leader in this area, so we can fund other development, whatever that looks like. But let's start on that one, and we'll go around each of these, talk about setting expectations, modeling behavior, creating a little bit of healthy competition, and then providing coaching. But curious your thoughts on the vision piece, Brahm.
Yeah, I mean, the vision is the most important thing, and I feel like every team meeting, something that we do is we start with our goals and vision for the year, and it's just a constant drip of, here's why we're here, here is our mission, and here's what we're aspiring to do by the end of this year. And so we literally have 3 slides that start every single sales meeting, and we walk our team through, here's what we're trying to achieve by the end of the year, here is why these initiatives are important for us, and if we can achieve that, here's what the outcomes will be for everybody. And so I think continuously sharing that vision and motivating the team and helping them to understand where we're going and why allows you to set those high expectations and create that competitive environment where you can show progress towards that on a monthly, weekly, quarterly basis as you make progress. So I think a lot of these things tie together, but if you haven't shared your vision, a lot of these other pieces fall apart.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting to then go back and look at, oh, if we want people to really be passionate and, that idea of grit, going that extra mile, if they can tie it to something bigger than themselves, right, and have a meaning, and it doesn't necessarily mean, solving world hunger or world peace, but having a vision that motivates them about why we're doing that. And I think your thought of communicating it often, getting back to that, making sure everybody can articulate it, it's great. Then, the next piece we talk about is setting high expectations. What I think is really interesting here, and we talk about it in our managing performance framework, how important that is to set the expectation, make it really clear what we're looking for, and in a hybrid environment, making sure everybody knows, okay, what are we trying to do every day? What are we going to be measuring? And if there's a gap, what are we doing about it? So it's not just saying, hey, everybody self-actualize, do it on your own. But no, we're still tracking, we're still managing, and we're going to support you in getting there. So one of the things around high performing sales orgs is we know that having that idea of a performance partnership, so establishing that we're trying to win together, we're trying to work together, having a clear definition of what the expectation is, and then having a conversation around how we're doing and holding people accountable. It's not just saying, okay, do what you can, but if we're not getting there, let's find out what's getting in the way. Let's give them feedback and realign it and talk about that. And, I'll just touch on this other area about communicating expectations, which is we want to really say, what are we looking for as an outcome? We want to hit the goal, but that's not enough. We can't wait till the end of the quarter to see whether we hit our goals or not. We need to think about the behaviors that are going to produce the results. So whether that's calling or the quality of the proposals or presentations. I'm curious, Brahm, and your team, how does that manifest itself? I mean, how are you setting those expectations, and what does that look like to both manage behaviors and the results?
Yeah, well, I think that it starts with at the beginning of every sales period. So we're on a quarterly basis here. I sit down with each of my AEs and I understand what their path to success for that quarter and for the rest of this year looks like. And once we've done that, then there's a lot of diving in around what they're going to need to do in order to achieve that goal. Or if there's a gap for what their quota is, then they have to put together a plan of how they're going to decrease that gap and then overachieve. And I think at that moment, that's my opportunity to align with them on an appropriate expectation of what they need to do to be successful. And then there's healthy check-in points. Are we on track? Are we off track? And as we sit down throughout the rest of that year, it gives us an opportunity for me to coach on specific actions that they're going to take on specific deals. Then it also allows me to take a step back and see trends across their entire business. And so I think it gives ownership to them, but it also allows me to say, here are our goals. This is what you are held accountable to. What is your plan and path to get there? And then that becomes a conversation and dialogue. And then it gives us something that at the very beginning, we know where we're going. So I can continuously follow up and check in on are we on track or not? And what's changed? Why? And then we can continue to dig into everything that's changed along the way.
Yeah, and that's such a great manifestation of that, because we often see, if you ask the managers, have they set expectations? And this research has been going on for years, but they'll say, oh yeah, I communicate often, I set the expectation. If you ask the employee or the sales rep, are you clear about the expectation? Do you really know what your boss well, it seems like it changes, I'm not really sure. The only way you really know is have that conversation, see if they can actually repeat back or articulate what you're talking about, follow it up with that email and say, remember we talked about these 3 things, or a scorecard, whatever it is. But they really need to know what you're paying attention to. And we know that if we set that expectation high, they're more likely to strive and work to get there. So I think it's just so important. And when we talk about this in our managing performance program, the first step we have a checklist for troubleshooting performance issues is, has the manager communicated expectations? You probably remember this, right?
I See the graphic.
Right? And have we given them feedback if they're not meeting expectations? And it's often, we have people complaining, well, they're not getting there, they're not doing it right, it's a training problem, or there's some technology issue or whatever. It's like, well, no, wait a minute. Have we clearly communicated expectations? And if they're not meeting expectations, have we sat down and have a conversation in a supportive way, but at least letting them know what we expect and where they're going? So it's just critical to that performance.
Could not agree more. And I think, a lot of this is that I've been sharing is kind of the putting together the plan, but what happens when you're off plan? And I think a big part of it is, do your people actually know that they're not on track? Do they know where they stand? And Ray, to your point, I still think about, have I set the expectation, and do they understand how they're doing according to that expectation? And that gives them the opportunity to respond and react to the feedback that you're giving them. But if you haven't given them that feedback or those expectations, they're not necessarily going to be able to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, and it really goes to some of these other factors. If we think about, do we have empathy? So that's why that's in the middle. But are we really thinking about where they are? And if they're off track, and we have to say, well, isn't it obvious? Or they're not going to hit their number, don't they know they should just work harder? Well, we don't know where they are, personally, and with their situation in this hybrid environment, really what's going on, getting in the way. We really need to then have that diagnostic, that discussion, say, well, let's figure this out. How can we get back on track? What needs to happen? How can I support you? That idea of the servant leader. And I think it's just so important to really think about the individual and their situation, set the expectations, give the feedback, model the behavior. And this was another thing that came up in Duckworth's book, but people will follow a good example. And guess what? They'll follow a bad example.
Yep.
And so, if you're late to meetings, if you're not prepared, if you're not taking the one-on-one seriously and kind of rescheduling, blowing up, they get that message, just like from a parent, they see what reality looks like. And, I started my career as an officer in the Navy, and I had a executive officer who had the comment, and it stuck with me years and years later. And he said, the only thing I'll accept for poor performance from your team, I'll accept that from them if you've set a bad example. That's on you. So that's not their fault. That's on you. So I'm going to look to that first. And what is that example? So I think for all of us, we should think about, as a leader, what example are we trying to set? How can we model that that behavior, and why that's so important? And then I'll just tie that to setting that competitive environment. And I think this is a really interesting area to think about healthy competition. Not you have to win or lose, but we're competing together. And the idea of maybe having a shared sales goal that people are working for. We have one going on this month just on booking more meetings, but it's a team goal. If we hit a certain threshold, last time we detailed the sales team's cars, right? And that was kind of a fun way of saying, hey, we'll bring in the detailer and we'll get everybody's car detailed if we hit this goal. Well, guess what? We doubled our number of meetings. I mean, it was just miraculous. Just paying attention to that. Not that it was even that big of a spiff, but just upped the game. And I think there's a lot of fun things. And Brahm, I think there's some things you're doing with your team, but I'd love to know, how do you create that spirit of a competitive environment, or at least that we're going to charge ahead towards these expectations?
Yeah, I think, back to the modeling, the behaviors piece, I'll never ask my team to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so, I really think about that when it comes to any of the things that I would ask them to do. And in terms of creating a competitive environment, I love having a shared goal or competitor that we're competing against, internal or external. And for us, we really try to foster a collaborative environment. And so we do post leaderboards, and once a week we go through, an email gets sent out to everybody around where they're tracking according to their progress year to date across the entire sales org, and it's fully visible for everybody, completely transparent. And then in my team meetings, every single week, I go through how we're trending, where we're at comparison to other teams. And then I have each of my sellers go through and share just a 1-minute story about one of the key deals that they're forecasting for the quarter. And people love sharing stories. And so it fosters collaboration and opportunities for people to learn from each other, but also they're proud that they get an opportunity to show that they've got something that's going to contribute to our goals. in our team meetings. And we look at the competition both as, you know, some other teams that we want to beat in a friendly way. And then really we're thinking about beating our competitors. That is who we set out as, you know, we're going to win together. And, you know, we want everybody to crush our competition. We want everybody to blow out their number. It's not at the expense of any of our peers. So I think that's the culture we've really tried to foster.
Yeah, that's great. I know one of the stories that really stuck with me in Duckworth's book was actually with the Seahawks up here, because she works with Pete Carroll in the Seahawks organization. And Pete Carroll is who's the coach of the Seahawks, if people don't know, is fond of the idea of compete actually comes from working together. So the Latin, if you look at the word itself, it's not I win, you lose, but it's striving together is the root of that. And how do we compete as a team, right? How do we win as a team? What can we do? So I think doing that as a sales team can really have profound impact. So however we create that environment. And then the last piece we'll touch on is, you know, this idea of coaching. And we've touched on it a little bit. We've talked a little bit about it, but I think we've all had a good experience in the past, probably, whether it's with sports or education, or maybe in business, of what a great coach looks like, where they're really committed to us. They're working to build our and earn our respect. You know, it's not that it's all cheerleading, right? But they're providing candid feedback. They're helping us learn from our mistakes, and focusing on, you know, what can we control? Those behaviors, not this was good, this was bad, but how did this impact the outcome? How can we improve that going forward? And I know we've talked about this a lot, Brahm, in terms of that coaching mindset, you know, but we have this 3A model. So let's ask them first and get their input. Let's listen to what they have to say versus giving our prescription or lecturing or directing, right? Telling and yelling. And let's assume they're trying to do a good job versus assuming that they're incompetent or screwing up or lazy or not working. But let's assume they're trying to do that. Now, how do we help them get there? What's getting in their way? But I know you put this into practice, you know, with your team and with the training. How does this come out for you in terms of coaching and working with your team?
Yeah, I think it's funny. So I went through race training, and I, in different language, described this right here in terms of how I approach coaching with my people. But I think it really comes down to, do you have their best intentions in mind? And when I invest in my people, I want them to know that I'm taking the time to invest in them and not just driving towards an outcome. And so I make that a big part of my mindset as well. And so when I engage in these coaching moments, it's really important for me to sit down, look them in the eye, whether it's virtually or in person, and really get them to open up about what happened. And there are multiple examples where, you know, even with new hires, we'll have their first couple of sales meetings, and I'll sit down and be like, what'd you think? Like, tell me about it. Like, share all of your thoughts and perspective. And then I want to understand from them where they are at. And again, it's all about calibrating, but then I set some really firm expectations, and I share candidly, but again, with their best intentions in mind. There's a great book if you're trying to figure out the best way to communicate with your people, called Radical Candor. It's been a fantastic book for me that I've applied to my professional life as well as my personal life. But when it comes to communicating with your people, showing that you actively care about them, but you're being direct about what's important in the coaching moment, I think is the way that I really try to approach this. So I'm asking questions, I'm showing that I care, I'm actively listening to what they're saying, digesting and thinking through it, and then I'm sharing my perspective. And so that's kind of my framework in terms of how I sit down with my team members.
That's great. And I think that's so valuable to, you know, think about their perspective and have a conversation, right? I mean, that idea of being direct and providing feedback, but creating a supportive environment. And it's a fine line, but it's not just do this or else, but hey, let's do this together. Let's work together to achieve this goal. That's so important.
Exactly.
So, you know, one of the things we hear these days is, well, coaching is even more difficult. We can't go out, you know, in the days if we're riding along, or we'd go out on presentations or be with our reps, you know, maybe that's not available as much. We have the remote team, so maybe they're across the country. So there's some things that come up in this hybrid world that are interesting, because if I hear, well, we can't coach, we can't be there with them, I think that's a little bit of a cop out. And in some ways, I think there's more opportunity these days, because if we're doing virtual, that means we are in that environment. So either we can join the call, or now people are okay with recording calls. It's more of the norm. And if we have things like Gong or Chorus that are providing us call recordings and insights, we can go back and look at that. So doing that coaching and going back to that analytics can be extremely valuable. And as we say here, even pre-call coaching. So let's coach before the call. You have this on Monday. Well, let's play that out. What's your objective? What are you expecting the customer to do? What are some of the objections that are going to come up? So we can coach before, we can join, we can listen or analyze those recordings. Coaching after the fact, where we're going back, and I love looking at the transcript. And you can see exactly what was said and how much the rep was talking. If you're using analytics, how much was the customer talking? How many questions did they ask? So now it gives us insight to go back to that conversation and say, well, how did that go? Did you accomplish your objective? And what else was going on there? And then, doing things like role plays and simulations, or role playing those in team meetings as a way of recapping. I don't know, what else are you using, Brahm? I think it's interesting, since you have a distributed team and you kind of have to do that. How does that work for you?
Yeah. So something that I've aspired to, and I really try to hold myself accountable to, I will try to listen to one meeting recording per person on my team per week. And that is something that I want to, again, go back to invest in each of my people to help them to become better. But I also am very specific with what I'm trying to coach too. So I think before I even go into spending any time on any coaching, I need to align with my sellers on where they want to improve, what they want to collaborate and be coached on, and what they would find most helpful in getting my perspective on. I can give generic or coaching on one topic, but really they're like, I feel pretty good about that. I care about this other thing. Like, for instance, one person on my team, I'm really working on next steps. At the end of their sales calls, how do they navigate asking for the next steps, and how do they determine what those next steps are going to be? And so now what I'm doing is I've asked this individual for, at the end of every one of their sales meetings, can they take the last part of that meeting and send me the recording so that I can listen to it, and then we can have a conversation about it. So that's one way that I've put the onus on them. If they want to get better, make it easy for me. And then the other part of it is for everybody else, we'll have conversations, and then I will go in and try to listen to one or two recordings. Maybe for somebody else, it's the questions they're asking. So I'm going to only listen to that part of the recording for that individual. And then that gives me something to have a one-on-one conversation about in our next meeting. So those are a few different tactics that I'm using to try to help. And I try to focus on one or two, maybe three max skills or coaching moments per person at any time, so that we really get good at one thing before we move on to the next.
Well, that's so important, Brahm. I'm not a fan of the post-call evaluation scoring. Like, hey, we're going to evaluate each call and tell you did these 8 things subpar, because you're less likely to actually accomplish any of them if you have more than 2 or 3 priorities.
Yep.
So let's build that plan together and say, well, really this quarter, let's focus on how you're asking questions and how you're handling objections or whatever those key skills are, but not give them a laundry list every time of, okay, now here are all the other things you have to fix. It just becomes overwhelming. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can coach and manage. I think that's so critical in this hybrid world to think about how we're doing that, how we're using video and virtual to make that engaging and show up with our reps. And then the last piece, just to go back to this model one more time about having empathy, we talked about why that's so important. And it's interesting that, even Satya Nadella, right, the CEO of Microsoft, has published a number of articles and interviews about how important empathy is to Microsoft these days and how he sees it as a differentiator. So with their customers, if we can understand our customers, walk in their shoes, understand their perspective, we're better able to help them solve their problems. And for our reps, if we can, again, see it from their perspective, well, what's really happening? Now, how can we work with them to solve that problem? I think it really pulls all of this together. And even though, yeah, it's a soft skill, but more than ever today, especially when we think about the challenges of the last year and a half, we need to really think about that person first, and then think about, okay, well, how do we help them? What's going on there?
And if I could share, have empathy is something that's great to aspire to, but you're now like, okay, how do I have more empathy? I think literally asking more questions to better understand what your people are doing and why as you go through any moments are just one really easy way for you to understand them better, and then you can work on having empathy for their situation. So if all you take away from that piece is just ask more questions of them, that's a great place to start.
That's so important. And I would add, back to the 3 A's: ask more questions, and then shut up and listen and let them share. And sometimes, have that awkward pause, or let them think about it a while, as opposed to feeling like, we need to fill up every minute of the one-on-one or of the coaching session.
Exactly right.
So yeah, no, it's great. So let's bring this all together. The last piece is, well, how do we support the managers, and what can we do? And I know this is an area, that Highspot has really thought hard about, focused on. We actually have some of our courses out in the Highspot environment. But maybe you could talk about this idea of, how do we help support them in those behaviors, to equip them with the right tools, to train them, and to coach them, both for the managers and then for the reps. So maybe you could pull this all together for us, Brahm.
Yeah, this is how we here at Highspot think about supporting both manager. What we aspire to do is help all of our clients and customers to achieve consistent rep performance and execution. When you can take what's working for your top performers and get everybody else to consistently leverage and execute on those best practices, you achieve incredible results. And so in order to do that, what you first need to do, we think about this in almost a sports analogy. If you're a team, first thing you need to do is equip your players with the playbooks, resources, and equipment that they'll need in order to actually play: the pads, the cleats, etc. From there, then you need to actually give them some practice. So you've now given them the playbooks and the equipment, but they got to practice putting it into play before they actually go up against another team. And so you want to give them a place to train and practice in a safe environment. And then from there, then once they've actually gone out and used those playbooks, they've put that practice and actually put it into play in front of a client or customer, you need to be able to go back and understand what worked well, what didn't, so you have a chance to coach them to improve upon that in the end. And then you're analyzing all of this at any time, so that maybe you need new equipment. Maybe the equipment's fantastic, but the training, you're not doing enough training. So what you need to be able to do is understand what's working, what's not, even within this model. And this is the way that we think about it. If you haven't, you need to start with equipping with the equipment and the training before you can get to the coaching. And that kind of ties in, Ray, to if you haven't set the expectation, you can't hold your team accountable. And I look at the equip part and the training part as the accountability and setting the expectations component.
That's so great. And what I love about some of the sales enablement technology, and certainly with Highspot, is you can also then see what's being utilized, see what's helpful, where they're going, and being able to leverage that, right? So which of the plays are really being used and are valuable, or is the training resonating, and where are the gaps that we need to plug? So now gives you a better picture and some better analytics there as well.
That's exactly right. So the Highspot platform itself is each of those components together to help you to know where to spend your time.
That's great. So I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, and if anyone has any other questions, feel free. You can chat them in or in the Q&A. We're happy to follow up offline as well. You will get a follow-up email. But, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about, why the sales managers are critical today more than ever, and what's made it even more challenging and complex, and then figuring out how to lead, manage, coach, and motivate in this environment, and hopefully able to share, some of the lessons and experiences that we're seeing. And then, helping those managers, because we do believe that they're a point of differentiation. And if we invest in our managers, we'll get better results. So being able to support them with the tools, with the training, with the coaching, as you articulated. Anything else you'd like to add to this, Brahm, in terms of what we've covered here today?
I would just say the manager role is one of the most challenging roles that there is. You have to be responsible for your team being the best sellers that they can, and also manage a team forecast and new initiatives and expectations being thrown at your way internally. And so just investing in yourself as a manager, companies investing in their frontline managers only will scale the impact that you can have on your business. So good luck and go get them.